What's up guys, Asian here with another build video. Today we're going over the two-handed Stam DK build. This build is actually more complex than I thought it would end up being. I thought it would be simple as replacing Stone Giant on my dual wield Stam DK build with Wrecking Blow and moving on from there, but then I decided, hey, why not try to maintain the Stone Giant stagger debuff and still use Wrecking Blow as my primary spamble. So I did manage to do it, but this rotation is actually far more complex than I thought it would be. You can simplify the rotation down a fair amount just by completely getting rid of Stone Giant. So I will be going over that rotation, but the best rotation is going to be maintaining that Stone Giant stagger debuff. Additional damage that you get from it is actually fairly noticeable in a 21 million dummy parse. We're talking on the order of around 1k to maybe even upwards of 2k additional DPS, which is actually noticeable. And it will translate in raid as well, especially if you're the only DK that is using the Stone Giant morph here. So like the rest of our build videos, this is not going to include anything about gear or any sort of character sheet information, CPs, things like that. That is all covered in a separate gear video, which will be popping up in the upper right hand corner right around now. This video instead will be focusing in on skills that we're going to be using, as well as the rotation itself. We will, of course, be doing a 21 million dummy parse, a raid dummy parse, just so you guys can get an idea of where a two-handed Stam DK build falls in comparison to the dual wield build, as well as other stamina builds that you might find on my channel. So let's go ahead and get started here with our skills. So our front bar here is incredibly interesting. So you have 3 Stam DK skills. You have Venomous Claws, Noxious Breath, and Stone Giant. But then you have your two-handed skills, Wrecking Blow and Executioner. Now in this particular build, we're going to be using Wrecking Blow as our primary spammable. This just gives us the Empower, and it is actually pretty strong, especially when you compare it to how much damage it deals when compared to Stone Giant. However, one of the key things about the rotation is going to be trying to maintain the stagger debuff that we get from Stone Giant. A little bit more on that later on in the video when we go over the rotation. But we must have Stone Giant on here, especially if we are the only DK in the group that's using Stone Giant. You can, of course, replace this to simplify the rotation by a large amount. And we'll go over that again towards the in a few minutes when we go over the actual rotation stuff. Now, in terms of spambles, Wrecking Blow is not your only option. For single target fights, Wrecking Blow is going to be the spamble of choice. But if you are in a situation where you need some additional cleave damage, then you can go with the another spamble from the two-handed line, Brawler or Carve. Personally, Brawler is the morph you're going to see used more often because it helps provide a damage shield every time you use it, and this damage shield increases for any enemy that is hit when you use Brawler. So, as you can tell, the actual damage it deals is not as strong as Wrecking Blow, so in terms of raw single target damage, Brawler does not compete, but the AoE potential combined with the survivability that you get from that damage shield is huge. So for a lot of stamina DPS builds, this is the morph that they use for trash fights to improve the overall survivability. The damage shield that you get from it is enormous, so up to 300% larger damage shield. That is a basically 4 times as large of a damage shield. So that basically brings you up to about an 18k damage shield if you hit that 300 cap. So really powerful here for survivability. Again, this will be replacing a Wrecking Blow in instances where you want some more AoE damage compared to single target damage. But beyond that, nothing else here really is flexible at all. Executioner, you can run the other morph, which is Reverse Slice, for some more splash damage if you'd like. You would be giving up some single target damage, but kind of the trade-off you have to make, either more single target or more AoE. So it's kind of up to you which one you want to choose, but a lot of people prefer to go with Executioner because single target damage in general is going to be more important than AoE damage in endgame PvE content. Then we have Flawless Dawnbreaker as our ultimate for the additional weapon damage that we get while we have it slotted. Then on our back bar is exactly the same as you see from our dual wield Stam DK build. The Flames of Oblivion, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Soul Trap, which you can swap out for any other ability, or either morph of Soul Trap, so Consuming Trap or Soul Splitting Trap, depends on what you want out of it. Consuming Trap to maintain a single target damage, get a little bit of sustain out in trash fights. Soul Splitting Trap for more cleave damage. Then Barbed Trap and Standard of Might is our primary damage ultimate. So a few abilities, I've already talked about a few of them here, especially in the two-handed line. I do want to point out Momentum. If you want to use this for Major Brutality, it is an option, but generally speaking, you'll be using weapon power potions in endgame PvE content and group content, basically. So I don't recommend running this unless you want to use this build in kind of a solo sort of setting, in which case I would probably say, sure, you can follow this build, but this is kind of overkill for overland content. In terms of class stuff, not much here to talk about. There really isn't that much stuff here that is good for stam DKs in terms of your class abilities. The only exception being maybe Molten Armaments for the Major Brutality and additional damage on your heavy attacks, but even that is kind of it's meh at best for group content. The other kind of abilities you want to kind of keep an eye on: Evasion, either Morph, Elude, or Shuffle for the Major Evasion, which decreases damage from AoE attacks. A lot of abilities actually are counted as AoE damage in ESO, so it's always nice to have that ability to get some additional mitigation. I talked about Soul Trap. You can use either morph, so the single target morph would be Consuming Trap, which gives you some additional stamina back whenever something dies, or you can go Soul Splitting if you want some more cleave damage instead. Under the Fighter's Guild line, Ring of Preservation is a good ability to have in your back pocket for the minor protection and the small heal that it provides. It's particularly useful in fights where people might be stacked up, just for the additional mitigation and heal. And then for a self-heal, you can go with Echoing Vigor or Resolving Vigor. So I personally recommend running Echoing Vigor because it can stack with other people's Echoing Vigors. So if you have multiple stamina DPS in the group and you guys are all running Echoing Vigor, the multiple vigors that you get from Echoing, when you add up all the healing done that you get from Echoing Vigor, it will out-heal if everybody were to run Resolving Vigor instead. So that's why I recommend Echoing Vigor. Now, on the flip side, if you're the only stamina DPS, there's no reason to run Echoing Vigor. You should just run Resolving Vigor instead. Of course, you can also heal other people with Echoing Vigor, so it might be more beneficial to run Echoing Vigor regardless, but Resolving Vigor does have higher healing done per second. You just aren't able to stack this with other people's Vigors, and you won't be able to heal anybody else with that either. So, as you can see here, not a lot of flexibility when it comes to abilities here for stam DKs. So, skill section wise, it's a pretty short, pretty light part of this video. A big portion of this video is going to be dedicated to the rotation, because as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, it's actually very complex. So, this is a dynamic rotation. Just telling this guys this right now, fully dynamic. There's just no way around it if you want to maintain the stagger debuff. The stagger debuff basically increases the damage that is taken by the enemy that is affected by this debuff for 6 seconds, and it stacks. So you can have up to 3 stacks of stagger. With each stack, they take an additional 45 damage. So this is just flat damage increase, which actually ends up being fairly noticeable in group content. It basically boosts DPS by anywhere between 1 to 2k or so, depending on how many dots you're running, and multiply that across 8 DPS, and you can get about an 8 to 16k DPS increase. Might not seem like a lot, but in score pushing environments, it's actually very. It can make a couple second differences, which can kind of make or break certain speedruns. Now, normally, if somebody is staggered 3 times, they are stunned, but bosses can't be stunned, so they'll always have the 3 stacks of stagger. Stagger stacks last for 6 seconds, which basically gives you enough time to do 5 abilities before you have to recast Stone Giant to maintain the stacks of stagger there. So that's really what we're going to be centering around. So it's going to be Stone Giant, 5 abilities, Stone Giant, 5 abilities. So you can kind of think of it as sort of a bow proc from the Nightblade class, but not really, because there is definitely a rotation behind this. So the general rotation is going to look like this. Now notice you will only have Barb Trap on your back bars, so you will need to bar swap fairly often to renew some of these dots because your dots don't really line up very well. Endless Hail is 14 seconds, Poison Injection is 10, Soul Trap is 10, Barb Trap is 18, Flames of Oblivion is 15. Then you have your 2 dots on the front bar, which last for 14 seconds. So a lot of mismatched timers here. Generally speaking, showing in this case is usually better than telling. So your back bar should always start off with Rearming Trap or the Minor Force. So first you want to get your 3 stacks of stagger going. hit it twice. Generally speaking, that's generally how it goes. So you can see here that I'm basically trying to maintain my 3 stacks. You can see an action duration reminder that I'm not trying to let it run out at all. Before I go to my back bar, I always re-up my stagger stacks. Then when I don't need to re-up stagger or renew any dots, I use Wrecking Blow. Otherwise, I am basically renewing all my dots. And so that's basically the general idea of the rotation. The idea behind this is you want to maintain those 3 stacks of stagger. If you lose those 3 stacks of stagger, use your next 3 global cooldowns to regain those stacks, and then continue on with renewing your dots and using Wrecking Blow. Once you hit roughly around 33 to 30% health remaining, you're going to want to swap from using Wrecking Blow to Executioner. At that point, the bonus damage from the execute mechanic of Executioner will out DPS a Wrecking Blow here. The complexity behind the rotation comes from the fact you want to maintain those stagger stacks from Stone Giant. And that's really what makes this rotation more complicated than it seems. Or I should say more complicated than it should be if you decide to go with maintain staggers. Now, if you have a DK healer or a DK tank or even another stam DK that's able to maintain the stagger stacks already, you might not need to run Stone Giant anymore. In which case, you can replace this ability with Barbed Trap or any other fighter skilled ability for additional weapon damage. I personally prefer to run Barbed Trap so I can use that on the front bar. If you decide to go that route, so let's say you have another Stam DK who says, hey, I'm a dual wield Stam DK, I'll maintain stagger for us. Swap Stone Giant out with Barbed Trap, and then your rotation becomes very simple. Because now you're just using Wrecking Blow, your spam bowl, and just maintaining your dots. So your rotation pretty much gets simplified quite a bit. It's still a little bit dynamic, but instead of having to maintain Stone Giant, you just do a crap ton of Wrecking Blows between needing to renew all your dots. You can see just how much easier this rotation is when outside of having to, recast stagger every couple of seconds. It's a little bit dynamic because your timers still haven't changed at all. But it's a little bit easier because now you don't have to, really worry about maintaining your stagger stacks. But for the parts that we're going to do on a 21 million dummy, we will try to maintain all 3 stacks of stagger. It is possible that I will lose them, in which case I will just let you guys know that, and I'll just re-up the stagger stacks. But we will try to maintain all 3 stacks of stagger. Now this rotation, as you can imagine, is pretty complex. So please bear with me while I do the full rotation here. But here we go, we're going to do a 21 million dummy parts so you guys get an idea of where a 2-handed Stam DK build, this build, kind of fits in compared to other stamina DPS builds on this channel, and where it stands in particular compared to the dual wield build. Go ahead and get started. Before we start, again I want to mention we will start using Executioner starting at around 33 to 30% health remaining. As for when we want to use our standard, just use it whenever it's up. Ideally you're going to want to bar swap out of it, so you would basically cast it, bar swap cancel, and just keep on doing what you're doing on your front bar there. If you're starting your back bar rotation and your ultimate's up, finish off whatever you're doing in the back bar and then use your ultimates and bar swap cancel out of that. And you will notice that I am only minimizing myself to 4 global cooldowns on the back bar, so 4 ability casts on the back bar, and that's just to help to maintain that stagger uptime. Here we go, and now I'll try to narrate that as we go through the entire parse. I'm going to do my dots first and then get my stagger stacks up. Okay, got my staggers, which means I start using Wrecking Blow. I like to use Stone Giant when I bar swap. 4 abilities, go back, do the stagger, go back to finish off getting my Flames of Oblivion again. Don't lose that stagger stacks. Again, before I do anything on my back bar, I always want to renew my stagger stacks. And for one more Wrecking Blow, then do another stagger to renew it before we do all of our back bar stuff. And that's normally just because you usually will be on the back bar for that full 4 seconds that I mentioned earlier. Stagger again. That's 4. Do stagger. Stagger before we renew our dots here. Stagger. Dots. We can get 2 wrecking blows in before we have to do redo stagger, and that ties nicely into our back bar. Renew stagger when we go back to our front bar here. Trap and Flames of Oblivion. Let our back bar dots run out a little bit here just so we can get our front bar dots going. Renew stagger. Back to wrecking blow. Stagger before we go back to our back bar. We do 4, then do stagger. Stagger. For dots. For stagger before we do a back bar. It's okay to actually let Flames of Oblivion run out a little bit. Obviously you don't want to do it too long, but it's perfectly fine to do that. Ah, shoot. That barb trap ran out for a little bit longer than I intended. I don't know why my character was just standing there like an idiot, but we'll work with it. Oh, I let my stagger run out there. A little bit too close to the sun there. At this point, we're going to start using Executioner rather than Wrecking Blow. So Executioner time. Remember to never lose those stacks of stagger. Get 3 of these off before we have to renew our stagger and our dots. Stagger. Backfire stuff. 4. And back to Executioner spam. Stagger before we do anything on our back bar. This is actually a pretty bad parse. I'll show you guys a better parse, but that's generally how the rotation is going to look. So for this parse, I actually got really low. I got only 79.1k, but I did a parse earlier before I actually started recording this video where I managed to pull 82.1k. So this is about as good as you can get. About 82.1k was what I was able to get using this exact same build. A little bit better, a little bit cleaner rotation. That kind of makes a difference for a 3k difference here. Let's just see if I can actually find out why this is better. 5%. Get as many executioners off. That's better one. 18 compared to 23 here. So probably just that was not a great rotation overall. I mean, it demonstrated the rotation well enough, but it was a bad parse. But here this is kind of what you can expect to see, around 82.1k. So pretty decent, but is very complex because you want to maintain that stagger debuff as best you can. See, 95% uptime on the stagger debuff here, and we did have to renew this on this parse as well. I did drop it on this parse once towards the beginning. So definitely very complex, not something I'm necessarily recommend for a beginner stamina DPS to really learn. But again, you can take out that Stone Giant if you'd like, replace it with something like Barbed Trap, and just run straight up Wrecking Blow, and you will only see about a 1 to 2k drop in overall DPS for a much less stressful rotation. But that concludes this build video. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them down in the comment section below. I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.